For 40 years, Henry Morrison had driven the same stretch of Route 23 through Delaware County, Ohio. Same truck, same quiet routine. The state troopers saw just another elderly driver causing problems, until they discovered his license was connected to operations that officially never happened. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden service, respect, and the secrets some people carry in silence, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. Delaware County, Ohio stretched across rolling farmland and suburban developments north of Columbus, bisected by major highways that connected the rural communities to the state capital. Route 23, also known as High Street in this section, ran straight through the heart of Delaware City, past strip malls, gas stations, and the kind of middle America landscape that defined much of the Midwest on this particular Tuesday morning. In October, Ohio State Highway Patrol Trooper Jake Peterson was stationed in his usual spot behind the Sunoco station at the intersection of Route 23 and West Central Avenue, running radar on vehicles heading south toward Columbus. At 26 years old, Peterson had been with the Highway Patrol for 3 years, long enough to develop the cynical edge that came from dealing with traffic violators, who always had excuses and rarely took responsibility for their actions. 1987 Ford F-150, that passed his position at 9:47 a.m., was exactly the kind of vehicle that drew his attention. Faded red paint, rust spots around the wheel wells, a cracked windshield that probably violated state safety regulations, and most importantly expired license plates that were 18 months overdue. Peterson pulled out from behind the gas station and activated his emergency lights. The pickup truck continued for nearly a quarter mile before finally pulling onto the gravel shoulder near the Delaware County Fairgrounds, its worn brake lights flickering weakly. As Peterson approached the driver's side window, he automatically cataloged details about the vehicle and its occupant. The truck's interior was clean but worn, with a faded military bumper sticker that read Army Veteran stuck to the rear window. Behind the wheel sat a man in his late 70s, thin gray hair beneath a John Deere baseball cap, weathered hands gripping the steering wheel with the slight tremor that often comes with age. "Morning," Peterson said, his tone already carrying the authority of someone who expected compliance. "License and registration." Henry Morrison reached slowly into his shirt pocket and produced a worn leather wallet. His Ohio driver's license, when he handed it over, was so faded that the expiration date was barely readable. But Peterson could see enough. "Expired 3 years ago." "Registration," Peterson repeated impatiently. Henry fumbled through the glove compartment, producing an insurance card and vehicle registration that were similarly outdated. Peterson examined the documents with growing irritation. "Mr. Morrison, are you aware that your license expired in 2020? "Yes, sir," Henry replied quietly. "I've been meaning to get it renewed. It's been 3 years." Peterson's tone sharpened. "And your plates are 18 months expired. Your inspection sticker is from 2019. Henry nodded, accepting the criticism without argument. Peterson continued his lecture, his voice carrying the condescending tone he reserved for drivers he considered particularly irresponsible. "You know what I see here? I see someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them, someone who figures they can just drive around however they want, without following the same laws everyone else has to follow. I understand your concern, officer," Henry said politely. "Do you? Because this isn't just about paperwork. You're driving a vehicle that hasn't been inspected in 4 years. Your license expired so long ago you'd probably fail the vision test if you took it today. You're a menace to everyone else on this road." Peterson was building up steam now, feeding off his own authority and the older man's passive acceptance of criticism. "I bet you're one of those people who complains about young drivers being reckless. But look at you. At your age, you should know better. You should be setting an example instead of acting like traffic laws or suggestions. Henry remained silent, his hands folded in his lap. "This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior that causes accidents," Peterson continued. "Old drivers who refuse to admit they shouldn't be on the road anymore, who think their convenience is more important than public safety." The lecture went on for several more minutes, with Peterson cataloging every violation he could identify and expanding his criticism to include general observations about elderly drivers, personal responsibility, and the decline of respect for law enforcement. Through it all, Henry Morrison sat quietly and took the abuse without defending himself or making excuses. Finally, Peterson returned to his patrol car to run Henry's information through the system and write citations for the multiple violations. He expected the routine background check to show a clean record, punctuated by a few minor infractions, the typical profile of an elderly driver who'd simply let his paperwork lapse. What he found instead changed everything. Peterson settled into his patrol car and began entering Henry Morrison's information into the mobile data terminal that connected him to the Ohio law enforcement gateway system. Name, date of birth, social security number, all routine data entry that he'd performed thousands of times during traffic stops. But when he pressed enter to submit the query, instead of the expected driver history and criminal background check, the screen displayed a message he'd never seen before. Restricted ACCESS Federal Classification. Contact Supervising Officer immediately. Do not proceed without AUTHORICATO. ATO and Peterson stared at the screen, assuming he'd made a data entry error. He cleared the query and re-entered Henry's information more carefully. Same message appeared. He tried a third time, double-checking every number and letter. The result was identical. Restricted access. Frustrated and confused, Peterson radioed his supervisor, Sergeant Lisa Martinez, who was patrolling a different section of Delaware County. "Sergeant Martinez, this is Peterson. I need you to run a background check on a traffic stop. I'm getting some kind of restricted access message." "What's the nature of the stop?" Martinez asked. "Elderly male, expired license and registration, multiple violations." But when I try to run his info, the system says restricted access and tells me to contact my supervisor. "Give me the details." Peterson provided Henry's personal information, and Martinez ran it through her own terminal. After several minutes, she came back on the radio with a tone Peterson had never heard from her before, cautious and slightly unsettled. "Peterson, I'm getting the same message, but there's additional information. The system is telling me to contact the Delaware County Sheriff's Office for federal liaison. Federal liaison for a traffic stop. That's what it says. Stay with your subject. Don't take any enforcement action until we figure this out." Martinez contacted the Delaware County Sheriff's Office, which was located on North Sandusky Street, in downtown Delaware. After 20 minutes of phone calls and consultations with supervisors who consulted with their supervisors, the sheriff's office connected her with Agent Rebecca Collins from the Columbus Field Office of the FBI. Agent Collins listened to the situation with growing interest. An elderly man with federal classification restrictions being stopped for routine traffic violations was unusual enough to warrant immediate attention. "What's the subject's demeanor?" Agent Collins asked. "Cooperative, according to the trooper. Just sitting in his vehicle waiting. Any indication he's aware that his background is flagged?" "No. He seems to think this is just about expired paperwork." Agent Collins made a decision. "I'm en route to your location. Should be there in about 30 minutes. Tell your trooper to maintain the traffic stop, but not to discuss the classification issue with the subject." Meanwhile, Henry Morrison sat in his pickup truck, occasionally glancing in his rearview mirror at Trooper Peterson, who seemed to be having an unusually long conversation on his radio. Henry had been through enough bureaucracy in his lifetime to recognize when simple procedures became complicated, but he wasn't particularly concerned. He'd dealt with far more serious situations than traffic citations. Peterson, for his part, was growing increasingly uncomfortable. His routine traffic stop had somehow triggered federal involvement, and nobody seemed willing to explain why. He'd called in expired licenses before, without any unusual system responses. What made Henry Morrison different? At 10:31 a.m., an unmarked black sedan pulled up behind Peterson's patrol car. Agent Collins emerged, a woman in her early 40s wearing a dark business suit that immediately identified her as federal law enforcement. Even without visible credentials, she approached Peterson's vehicle and displayed her FBI identification. "Agent Collins, Columbus Field Office. What can you tell me about your subject?" Elderly male, appears to be in his late 70s. Driving expired everything: license, registration, inspection, cooperative but not very talkative. I've been giving him a hard time about being irresponsible, but he just takes it without arguing. Agent Collins looked toward Henry's pickup truck, studying the man behind the wheel, who was now watching the federal agent's arrival with obvious interest, but no apparent alarm. Has he asked why the stop is taking so long? No, just sitting there, waiting. Agent Collins made notes on a small pad. I'm going to need to speak with him directly. There are some questions about his background that need clarification. She approached the driver's side of Henry's truck with the careful bearing of someone trained to assess potential threats while appearing casual and non-threatening. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Agent Collins with the FBI. I wonder if I could ask you a few questions." Henry looked at her with calm curiosity. "Of course, though I'm not sure what the FBI would want with a traffic stop. When we ran your information through our systems, some unusual flags came up. Nothing that suggests you're in any kind of trouble, but I need to verify some details about your background." Henry nodded. "What kind of details?" Agent Collins consulted her notes. "Our records show that your social security number is associated with federal employment that's still classified. Can you help me understand what that might refer to?" For the first time during the entire traffic stop, Henry Morrison's expression changed. The passive acceptance he'd shown Trooper Peterson was replaced by something more alert and calculating. "What kind of classification level are we talking about?" he asked. "The kind that requires me to make phone calls to people who don't usually take calls about traffic stops." Henry was quiet for a long moment, considering his response. Finally, he asked, "Agent Collins, do you have a secure phone?" Agent Collins recognized the shift in Henry Morrison's demeanor immediately. The elderly man who had passively accepted criticism from Trooper Peterson was gone, replaced by someone who understood federal classification protocols and knew what questions to ask about secure communications. "I can arrange for secure communications if necessary," she replied carefully. "Can you tell me why that might be needed?" Henry studied her face for a moment, then made a decision. "My name is Henry Morrison. From 1963 to 1995, I was employed by the Central Intelligence Agency. My last position was Deputy Director of Operations for the Soviet Division." The statement hit Agent Collins like a physical blow. The Deputy Director of Operations was one of the most senior positions in the CIA hierarchy, responsible for all human intelligence gathering operations in a given region. During the Cold War, the Soviet Division had been the agency's most critical and secretive department. "You're retired CIA," she said, not a question but a confirmation. 32 years of service. I've been living quietly in Delaware since my retirement, trying not to bother anyone or draw attention to myself." Agent Collins looked back toward Trooper Peterson, who was still sitting in his patrol car, completely unaware that he'd been lecturing one of America's most senior intelligence officers about personal responsibility. "Mr. Morrison, can you help me understand why someone with your background would let his driver's license and vehicle registration expire? That seems inconsistent with your training." Henry smiled slightly, the first time he'd shown any humor during the entire encounter. Agent Collins, I spent 3 decades managing operations in countries where a single paperwork error could get people killed, where every document had to be perfect, every identity had to be bulletproof, every detail had to be precisely maintained. He gestured toward his truck's dashboard, where Agent Collins could see a neat stack of unopened mail. When I retired, I decided I was done with paperwork, done with bureaucracy, done with systems and procedures and regulations. I wanted to live like a regular person who could let things slide without people dying because of it. But surely you understand that vehicle registration and driver's licenses serve important safety purposes, Agent Collins said. Of course they do, and I'm not trying to endanger anyone. But for 30 years, I couldn't make a single mistake, couldn't miss a deadline, couldn't let any detail slip through the cracks. The psychological pressure of that level of precision nearly broke me. Henry looked toward Trooper Peterson, who was still waiting in his patrol car. That young officer spent 15 minutes lecturing me about personal responsibility and following rules. He called me selfish and irresponsible. And you know what? He was right. I am being irresponsible. But it's the first time in my adult life that I've been allowed to be irresponsible without people's lives hanging in the balance. Agent Collins was beginning to understand. The expired paperwork is intentional. It's your way of rebelling against a lifetime of enforced perfection. Not rebelling exactly, more like ... recovering. Learning how to be human instead of being a machine that processes classified information and manages deadly operations. She consulted her notes again. Our records show you were involved in some very sensitive operations during your career. I was involved in operations that helped end the Cold War peacefully, instead of through nuclear exchange. I managed assets behind the Iron Curtain, who provided intelligence that probably prevented World War III, and I did it all while maintaining cover identities and following security protocols that would make military special forces look casual. Henry paused, then continued more quietly. I haven't had a single day in 40 years where I could just not worry about details, where I could let something slide without calculating the consequences. Do you have any idea what that kind of constant vigilance does to a person's mind, Agent? Collins found herself nodding. Federal law enforcement required its own version of constant vigilance, though nothing approaching the level Henry described. So when you retired, you decided to let some things slide deliberately. I decided to see what it felt like to be imperfect, to be careless, to be the kind of person who lets their license expire because they forgot or didn't feel like dealing with it. Agent Collins looked at the pickup truck, rusty, poorly maintained. A stark contrast to the precise attention to detail that would have characterized Henry's professional life. The truck is part of it too. I drove government vehicles for 30 years. Black sedans, armored cars, everything maintained to precise specifications. This truck breaks down sometimes. The radio doesn't always work. The heater makes strange noises. And you know what? I love it. Because when it breaks down, nobody dies. When the radio fails, no operations get compromised. When the heater makes noise, no cover gets blown. Agent Collins was quiet for a moment, processing this explanation. Then she asked the question that would determine how this encounter ended. Mr. Morrison, are you still psychologically stable? Are you capable of safely operating a vehicle? Henry looked directly at her. Agent Collins, I spent 3 decades making life-and-death decisions under pressure that would crush most people. I managed operations that shaped the geopolitical landscape of the entire world. If I say I'm mentally competent to drive a pickup truck to the grocery store, you can believe me. She nodded. I believe you. But I still need to address the legal issues here. Henry reached into his glove compartment and produced a folder that Agent Collins hadn't seen earlier. Inside were current versions of all his vehicle documents, registration, insurance, Inspection certificates, all properly dated and legal. You have current paperwork, she observed. I renew everything when it expires. I just don't bother to keep it in my wallet or display the new stickers. It's my small act of rebellion against a lifetime of enforced compliance. Agent Collins examined the documents, all of which were valid and current. Henry Morrison was legally authorized to drive his vehicle. He was just choosing not to display that authorization in the conventional manner. She walked back to Trooper Peterson's patrol car. Officer Peterson, I need you to return Mr. Morrison's documents and release him without citation. Without citation? He's got expired everything. No, he doesn't. He has current documents. He just doesn't carry them in the conventional manner. And his background check shows he's someone who deserves considerably more respect than you've been showing him. Peterson was confused but compliant. He approached Henry's truck and handed back the expired documents he'd confiscated. Mr. Morrison, you're free to go. Agent Collins says there are no violations to cite. Henry accepted his papers with quiet dignity. Thank you, officer. And no hard feelings about earlier. You were doing your job. As Henry drove away in his rusty pickup truck, Agent Collins watched until he disappeared down Route 23. Then she turned to Trooper Peterson. Officer, I want you to understand something. The man you just spent 15 minutes lecturing about personal responsibility served his country for 30 years in ways you can't imagine. He made sacrifices you'll never be asked to make, and he kept secrets that helped preserve the freedom you swore to protect. Peterson looked confused. He was just an old guy with expired paperwork. No, Agent Collins corrected him. He was a patriot who earned the right to let his paperwork slide if he wants to. And next time you encounter someone like him, maybe consider that there might be more to the story than you can see on the surface. Henry Morrison continued, driving his rusty pickup truck around Delaware County for several more years, carrying current documents but displaying expired ones, maintaining his small rebellion against a lifetime of enforced precision. Trooper Peterson, meanwhile, found himself approaching traffic stops with more curiosity and less judgment, wondering what stories the people he encountered might be carrying with them. Agent Collins filed a report recommending that Henry's federal classification status be updated to reflect his preference for privacy and his right to live without constant bureaucratic oversight. And somewhere in the files of the Central Intelligence Agency, Henry Morrison's service record remained classified, a testament to operations that helped shape the modern world, but which the world itself would never know about. At the Human Stories, we believe that everyone deserves respect until they prove they don't deserve it. And sometimes, the people who seem to be breaking the rules are actually people who've spent their lives following rules. So important and so demanding that their small rebellions are not just understandable, they're earned. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever misjudged someone based on appearances? What did you learn when you discovered the truth? And from what city are you watching this story unfold? Subscribe to the Human Stories for more tales about the hidden heroes among us, the sacrifices we never see, and the reminder that everyone has a story worth understanding before we judge their choices. We'll see you in the next story. And remember, that person who seems to be breaking the rules might be someone who's spent their life following rules that were more important than any of us can imagine.